remain constant. That is certainly something I can say that in additional efforts that we will be doing over the next couple years will probably change.
Yeah, the one thing that's really nice about the kind of framework that we put into place with Crate, in addition to giving them these recommended inventory levels, which are driven by lots of parameters, such as how frequently do I deliver to the store, how long does it take from when I decide to send something to the store that it gets to the store. That may vary for items, for example, that are coming from domestic suppliers, that may be cross-docked. There are a number of alternatives for how the supply chain is structured. In our framework, actually, we can take those kinds of questions, like should we deliver less frequently, more frequently, and we can actually analyze and understand what the profit impact of that decision is, because we can change the parameters in our models and say, this is how much more or less inventory you'd have in the store. If I went once a day, or once every day to a store, I could have much less inventory, but I'd be spending a lot of money on deliveries. Right. If I decided to go once a week, I would go less frequently, but I would have to put more inventory in the store, or I would be suffering more and more lost sales. Right. And we can actually evaluate that.
And Jerry can testify that there's probably once every 2 or so months I call him up and say, could you run this?
Right.
So could we see what the impact would be if we changed X?
Yep. And, that's part of the whole relationship, is that it's not that we're really running this technology base for Crate, and we're partnering on essentially working in this particular problem space together to both of our benefits.
Mm-hmm. And the final question from our live audience, and if your question wasn't answered, it could be answered via email at some later point.
Yeah, Ken, we will try and, I think we have a list of all those questions, and right. We will try and reach out to everybody and then contact them and have a one-on-one discussion.
Right. But to wrap up the Q&A session, how precisely can you measure the cost of holding inventory? Now, that would seem to be a pretty important component in correctly maximizing profit. Can you talk about the accuracy of measuring?
Well, I think it is a important component, and I think there are at the same time general classes of merchandise, and I think based on the analysis that we did, and if we take a look at our small ticket housewares goods. Yeah, you can get into sort of splitting hairs on the exact cost because of the size right. and the amount of space that it takes up. But really, our final analysis on that was that the carrying cost was pretty consistent in that class of goods.
Yeah, there are two kinds of costs for that. One is what I would call a systemic cost. Crate and Barrel has warehouses, and they have trucks that go every week from the DC to the store. And yes, theoretically, you could have 3 trucks go because it's really, really busy. And frankly, they're one of their largest stores at Christmas has a lot more than that going there. But you don't mind sending those trucks. But there's basically a fixed cost for running the system. And so that cost, actually, you can just kind of add on and say that's part of the normal cost. There's the cost of funds. I could take the money and put it into a money market account, a CD, or some treasury bill or something, and I could get money back. And then there are some costs that I would say would be item-specific costs. For example, if it's a fashion item that has a very low recovery cost at the end of its life, and if I overbuy it, then it has an obsolescence cost. And those are costs that you have to take into account, not so much in the inventory side, but more in the buying and then the markdown strategies of those particular products. But what we found is that actually, by understanding kind of that systemic cost, that's really kind of the most important component. And most retailers have a cost that they carry internally that is essentially a cost of funds. They could be using that money to open a store. They could be using that money for other activities, and tying it up in inventory essentially takes away from the ability to do those other activities.
And I guess I could add that, then I think there are some, exception SKUs or groups of SKUs. If you have items that are physically large, that take up lots of space in the stock room, you need to make some adjustments in terms of that carrying cost.
And one of the things that actually Crate has very extensive information about the size of items, its weight, et cetera, because they do a very big direct marketing or direct mail business. And so we actually leverage that data to look at things like, how much product are we going to try and put in the store, and will it fit in the store? So there are constraints that we can actually put on things based on their size or whatever. So those are also obviously a cost. I can't have an infinite space in the back room.
Jerry and Ed, you've given us a lot today. Is there any one last quick point you think we should leave on?
Well, from my side, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact us. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen in, and I hope that you learned some things and we shared some things that were of value. We certainly would love to hear your perspective on the kinds of challenges that you face. And if there are friends or people that you know that you think it makes sense, the link will be live, I think, later today or tomorrow, Ken?
Yes, it will.
That we'll be able to go back and replay, and I think it'll be up on Chain Store Age and also accessible through the 4R website for quite a period of time.
Jerry Neckelba of 4R Systems, Ed Renneman of Crate and Barrel. I'm Ken Clark from Chain Store Age. On behalf of all of us, thank you very much for participating, and thanks for listening.